Hi, it's Kevin May, the Editor-in-Chief of PhocusWire. Hello. Rod Cuthbert, we can now call you, for the purposes of this interview, you're the Viator founder. You've arrived here at Arival with presumably your old hat on to a certain extent, just observing what's going on. You're no longer directly with Rome to Rio. But you created Viator in the late 90s. You did all the growth through the 2000s. You sold the business to TripAdvisor a couple of years ago, and now you're back looking at everything. Did you think at any point in time, because there's a rather big search engine that existed around the same time as you came on stream, really, isn't it? Around, give or take a few years. Did you ever think throughout that entire time, as you saw other travel businesses take an interest eventually in tourism activities, that Google would do so? Because it's starting to do so now, and people are talking about it a lot here and just generally in the market over the last couple of months.
Did I think that Google would take an interest in the tours and activities space?
Yeah.
As soon as I saw them take an interest in flights and hotels, I realized that, like the industry itself, it would eventually shine the spotlight on the really interesting part, and the part that's most disaggregated.
Right, but did they take a while to, it's taken them until 2018 to take it very, very seriously. Is that because they were just watching what everyone else was doing first? Okay, let them figure out for certain things, then we'll come on and do our way of doing it almost.
Well, I think no matter how big you are, you can't do everything at once. So they're going into lots of different industries, and ours is, travel is a really important industry to them. I think one of the themes one of the things that I can't help escaping as I look at the industry right now and I look at Google's emerging role is that it's not positive for our space, for this sector.
Before we get into a long list of presumably things that aren't positive, are there any elements at all that are positive? Just because people often say, well, it raises awareness of the industry and that's good for consumers and good for suppliers and things like that. But you would say no, or would you say I concede that is marginally a positive thing?
Google's role up till now has allowed the industry to grow, and the fact that they were a monopoly, the fact that everybody started their search with Google, meant that the intermediaries like us and Expedia and Get Your Guide, etc., we were able to focus our efforts on being good at Google SEO and good at Google SEM, with the confidence that that would drive customers to us. So we all spent a lot of money with Google. We all spent a lot of money on SEO to ensure that we were high up in the ratings. And that allowed what's here today to occur. It allowed a discrete and homogenous subsector of the travel industry to emerge. So everything that Google's done up until about the last 12 months has been incredibly powerful and has allowed us to lay a really strong foundation for what I would call the online experiences marketplace.
But now you're worried.
Now I'm really worried, and look, I think a terrific analogy, and history is so often a good guide to the future, is the position that airlines found themselves in 20 years ago. And that is that the GDS companies charged them ever-increasing segment fees because so many of the bookings that airlines got came through the GDS systems, and they didn't have anywhere else to go. Then the internet emerged and the airlines were able to reverse out of that road. The internet gave them a way out. The airline brands were strong enough that people would say, oh, I'm going to Honolulu, Hawaiian Airlines, I'll just go directly to the Hawaiian Airlines website, and they were able to book directly with Hawaiian Airlines. So they were able to bypass the GDS. Tours and activity companies are about to head down that road by playing with Google, by being a part of Google Reserve and Touring Bird, etc.
Right, but Google has done Google Flight Search. Have they kind of shone a light on what they're going to do in tours and activities with the way they've behaved with airlines in Google Flight Search?
Well, whether it's Google Flight Search or Google Hotels, that's not a finished story. I think Google's role in the travel space is not good for the travel space the way they're acting now as an intermediary.
Right.
I would take exactly the same position as the European Commissioner on this, which is that you shouldn't abuse monopoly power. They have monopoly power as a search engine and as the operator of the search advertising platforms. we as an industry have spent billions of dollars with them, educating them about this marketplace. And now they're using it against us by forcing the intermediaries out and taking their place.
Okay, but I mean, in its current guise, I mean, Google says that, the stuff that it's doing at the moment that's just emerged over the summer during Bird and things like that is working with intermediaries. So the content that they get comes via intermediaries, not suppliers yet. Is it the yet thing that's the thing that worries you?
Look, absolutely it's the yet thing. Google are really good at data science, so in a year's time they're going to know who the operators are and which are the segments that they ought to target to go direct. So all of a sudden people are going to start to get cut out, and you won't be buying a walking tour of Barcelona via Get Your Guide or a Napa Valley tour via Viator. You'll be buying it directly from those really successful and popular ones that Google have identified.
Okay. So what are the kind of, let's imagine there's kind of, Google is throwing a noose around the neck of the tours and activities industry.
Yep.
I'm sure it's a phrase that you may have used yourself to describe it, but just working on what you're saying, how quickly and what are the stages of that tightening of the noose are we likely, in your theory, going to see first and then next?
It's a really interesting conundrum. I think the first thing is that nobody wants to not play. Whether you're a tour operator, a technology company that sort of provides the plumbing, the infrastructure, or a third party, you want to be involved. There's no upside in not being involved. And frankly, a lot of companies worry that if they're not involved, if they say no to Google, that somehow it will impact their search rankings, which, I wouldn't comment on that, whether it would or not. But, for the larger companies, for the Expedias and the TripAdvisors and the Klooks and the Get Your Guides, there's sort of no upside in talking out loud about it either. Why would Expedia, for instance, say we're worried about Google's incursion into our space? Wall Street doesn't want to hear that.
Right.
But I can tell you that all the big players are worried about Google's incursions into flights, hotels, and now tours and activities. They just don't want to talk about it.
Who do you think, if we're to surmise that it's online travel agencies, intermediaries, are going to be the ones that lose out? Mm-hmm. Of that group of online travel agencies, we have some very big ones, or let's say well-funded ones, and then we have a middle tier, and then you have other people. Who has the most to lose? Is it those that have raised lots and have a bigger profile, or is it those in the middle, do you think?
It's the Klooks and the Get Your Guides that don't have another source of traffic. So Expedia have a whole ecosystem.
Yeah, it's got its own customer base.
TripAdvisor have got a whole ecosystem. Yep. So to a certain extent they're protected. If you're not big enough to have your own ecosystem, or like Trivago say, to create a whole TV advertising world that generates traffic, I think you're in trouble.
Okay, and what's your kind of sense on the time frame for all this? You could be talking about something that's in 4 years' time before the noose gets really, really tight. And
yeah, we saw with Google Flights that they took quite a long time to put their foot on the accelerator. But
they're on a benchmark with Kayak now, according to some audience measurement services. So
yeah,
and Google Flight Search was the turn of this decade.
Yep.
So we're 2018. That's a while, right?
Yeah. Look, they're patient. They're rich. They've got tons of great staff. They have the ability to attract the best talent, and they don't seem to care about what I would call these sort of business ethics issues. Which for me, that's Expedia, Viator, TripAdvisor, etc. have spent tens of billions of dollars with Google. Now they're being disintermediated by Google.
Yeah. Wouldn't some people just say, well, that's capitalism, kind of suck it up, that's the way it all works?
Well, I think the European Commissioner would say that's an abuse of monopoly power.
Right, because it is the dominant search engine, and
right.
That's where everybody starts, of course. So, last point then, Rod. We saw what Google did as part of its entry into Google Flights. It didn't do this with hotels, but it bought a technology system to help it with Google Flights in ITA software, and they spent a lot of money doing so. Do you think that that's something that they would consider doing in this space, buying into some kind of tech vendor?
Look, I think Google has an infinite capacity to build things themselves. I think if you look at the lifespan of companies like Fair Harbor and Boken and other companies there, this technology, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's not a 10. It's not even a 7 or an 8. I think it's something that Google, if they wanted to, they could create themselves.
Okay.
And that might be an easier path for them.
Okay, even though some of these businesses may not cost as much as perhaps ITA software did, which was $600–700 million.
Right. I think either you or I would be speculating on what they might do there. I don't think it really matters.
Right. They just do it anyway, regardless of whether
they buy it or build it internally.
Buy or build, right? Yeah. Okay. I guess we'll see how it all plays out. Let's reconvene in a few years, and you can see whether the death knell that you've been pronouncing on the industry has come to fruition of some kind.
Right. I don't know how many Google employees are here at the conference today, but maybe next year they'll have 150.
Rod Cuthbert, thank you very much as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks a lot.